Hello, scholars. Congratulations on making it through your first week of classes. We said in class that calculus is the study, in a sense, the study of slope. We're going to talk about, for the first time, how the slope of a function can change over time or across its domain. So we remembered how to compute slope as change in y divided by change in x, or rise over run. We reminded ourselves that a vertical line has no slope. And what do we mean by no slope? So let's just remember that if you have a vertical line, any two x values on that line are the same. Well, any 2 points on that line have the same x value. So when you try to compute this x2 minus x1, you'll always get 0, which means we're going to divide by 0 when we compute rise divided by run, which means we're going to have division by 0, which is undefined. So another good answer that instead of no slope could have been undefined slope. And in calculus, we're going to need to understand it both ways. We said a horizontal line has slope 0. Slope equals 0. You could have written m equals 0. We said parallel lines have slopes that are equal. And perpendicular lines, I won't try to fit the word perpendicular there, but perpendicular lines have slopes that are opposite and reciprocal. Opposite and reciprocal. So if you needed an example of two numbers that are opposite and reciprocal are 3/5 and -5/3. 5/3 is the reciprocal of 3/5. We also need to change the sign. So opposite means to change the sign. Reciprocal means to take the numerator and denominator and exchange them. Okay, so we filled in some of these in class 2, and I'm sorry to say that I messed up my PDF after I gave it to you. So I tried to make that correction that we made in class today to say A and B here, and then I lost some of this stuff. So what you have on your paper is better. It's written in. We said the first equation you probably used was slope-intercept form. That was y equals mx plus b. And in your notes, you have a place where you wrote in that m stands for the slope and b stands for the y-intercept. So y-intercept meaning the place where your line crosses the y-axis. We said in calculus, you might find that we're going to use this much more frequently. Y minus y1 equals m times the quantity x minus x1. That's point slope form for the equation of a line. And in that case, the slope is m still. And the point that we use, the one point that we happen to know for sure is on our line. You see, I don't have a place to write it in on my paper, but you have a place that's x1 comma y1. Let me try to do better. x1 comma y1. So that's the takeaway I want you to have from knowing that formula. If you need to write the equation of a line, and you frequently will in our coursework, if you need to write the equation of a line, you can write it using point slope form if you have the slope of the line and you know any one point. If you want to use slope intercept form, you have to know specifically the y-intercept. But point slope form works if you know any one point on the line. Another form that we use to write the equation of a line is called standard form. That's ax plus by equals c. It's not that I need you to know that much about this equation. It's a very formal way to write the equation of a line, and you will find that answer choices on the AP test are frequently written in standard form. But it is rare that I'm going to ask you to produce standard form. And we'll do some practice just in case you have to. In standard form, there's one rule, which is that you can't have both A and B equals 0. Because if A and B were both 0, then the whole left-hand side of the equation would be 0 equals C. And that's not the equation of a line, because the equation of a line has to have a variable in it, either an x or a y or x and y. So here it says, in standard form, a and b are not both 0. Not both 0. You could have one of them be 0. If a is 0, that means there's no x term. So your equation has only a y term, and that's the equation for a horizontal line. If b is 0, then you have no y term, and you have an equation that has some kind of like x equals some number. That's the equation for a vertical line. Or if you have both an x and a y term, then it's some kind of, let's call it a diagonal line, neither horizontal nor vertical. A and b and c are typically integers. And if you're being especially fancy, they're typically relatively prime. That means there's not some number you could divide the whole equation by and still have integer a, b, and c's. Again, that's not going to be a big deal for us. I just want you to know the name of this form. So, of the above forms, which one has y written as a function of x? So that is this one we started with, because here I have y on one side of my equation, and then if I want to compute y, all I have to do is figure out what x is. I can plug it in and I perform a calculation. So y is a function of x. So I would say slope, intercept, or you could have written the equation y equals mx plus b. So what is sometimes helpful to us, we said we're going to use point slope much more frequently in calculus, but it's also very helpful to have y written as a function at least of things that we know. So here I suggest you take point slope form, which is here, and I'm going to isolate the y. Well, what is it that's making the y not by itself? It's this minus y1. So I'm going to go to a blank screen and I'm going to show you that I'm going to isolate the y. So here, if I wanted to isolate the y, I would notice that y is not by itself because it's having y1 subtracted. I might add y1 to both sides. I could write y equals m times the quantity x minus x1 plus y1, which would be equivalent to writing y equals y1 plus m times the quantity x minus x1, because I can change the order in which I add these two things. So you'll find that this is actually the equation given in the formula given in your textbook. It's not a big deal to me which way you know it. You'll definitely need to know point slope form for the equation of a line. You'll find that frequently the first thing you have to do with that is to isolate the y. So this is a good way to remember the formula. But again, any one of them would work fine.